Good. Yes, and thank you, Megan. We just started it recording. Let's see. Okay, one moment. Okay, Olsen, I just made you a panelist. Okay, we need a reader for Captain Prince.
Oh, yes.
And then please mute your mic unless you're using it for a comment. Thank you.
I can read Prince.
Okay, thank you. And how about Account Malevolent? Okay, if no one wants to volunteer for the count, does someone who's already read before?
I will.
Okay, Nathan? Okay, so I think we have all of our readers. So let's turn to page 177 here. Now, let's actually start at the bottom of page 176, where it says, Charlie Waldo was on deck talking to himself. So Nat's going to be the first reader.
Good for you, Charlie. You have that French accent all right. You won't miss it them if they come prowling around.
Okay, good. And does anyone want to volunteer for the narrator, or do you want me to do it? Anyone want to volunteer? Okay, Josh, let's have you be the narrator. So you can start at the bottom of page 176, the last line. Charlie smiled and bent his head to wipe his wrist. Josh, is your mic working?
Yes.
Okay. Did you want to be the narrator?
Yeah, I just don't have the book with me right now.
Oh, okay. Too bad. Does anyone have the book and would like to use it and be the narrator?
No, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Charlie smiled and bent his head to wipe his wrist over one cheek. In the moonlight, Nat could see the youngster's tear-stained face. Poor Tad, he was homesick.
Charlie, I wonder if you could do something for me.
Who's Charlie?
I wasn't sure if you wanted me to do it or if someone else was going to do it.
Let's see. Yeah, was that Kamala right there?
Yeah.
I'm not sure who we had for Charlie before, but why don't you go ahead. You take Charlie.
Okay. Aye, aye, sir.
I'm working on a problem in navigation. I'd like to explain it to you. If I can make you understand, I'll know I've got it.
Aye, aye, sir. Anything to help.
They walked to the deck while Nat explained. Charlie was quick. He got the explanation much faster than grown men generally did.
Hey, Charlie? That helped.
Thank you, Mr. Bowditch, sir. You don't know, but you helped me too.
Charlie grinned and went below, still muttering his words with a misplaced accent. One morning during their second week in Cadiz, when Nat was in Prince's cabin, Charlie came to them goggle-eyed.
You've got him, sir. A French spy. I can tell by the way he talks.
They went
Prince. Captain
Come,
Prince.
Mr. Bowditch.
They went on deck. Charlie was right. The erect, soldiery-looking man did have a French accent. It was Count Malavant, he told them, one of the French Navy. He had fled to Spain during the French Revolution. Nat knew that Charlie's sigh of disappointment came from his heels. Count Malavant said,
I understand there is a scholar aboard this American ship who is interested in astronomy. A very good scholar who has discovered a new way to work lunars.
There's your very great scholar, Nathaniel Bowditch.
Malavant invited Nat to visit the new observatory at Cadiz. The cat had gone. Prince bowed solemnly.
How do you do, scholar?
Nat laughed, but he felt the same warm flood of happiness he had felt when Dr. Holyoke called him an astronomer. He couldn't explain how he felt to a grown man, though. What it was to remember when he was 12 and found he'd never go to school again. Nathaniel Bowditch, indentured. He shrugged off the memory. That
Okay,
night when
we're gonna stop there. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Give yourself a pat on the back since we can't have an applause here. And then get ready. We'll think about, we're going to do one more of these reading things in a couple minutes. So think about if you want to, think about everyone who hasn't gotten a chance already, if you want to be. And then if no one volunteers, then we'll go back to those who have already gotten a chance and do it again. So here's a question. Why did Nat help Charlie?
He noticed that Charlie was homesick, and he realized that it was a good way to cheer him up. In fact, I think he'd actually done it before to cheer other people up, and realized that it had helped cheer himself up once.
He also remembered what it felt like to be alone.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anyone else have any other insight?
He knew using your brain, cheers you up and you don't feel sad when you're occupied with something.
Good. Right, so Nat Bowditch has discovered this secret to keeping off feelings of depression, homesickness, feeling down, feeling sorry for himself. What are some of those secrets, I guess you could call them?
He lost
Idle
himself
mind.
in research.
Sorry, I think we had two comments come in at once. Haley, do you want to go first? And then I think Michael was the other one.
Sure. I was going to say that he just lost himself in research and in learning.
An idle mind is the devil's workshop.
Very good. So he's finding something else to occupy his mind, and that takes him off of feeling bad about himself. Why does that help, though? Why would that help?
He wasn't thinking about it anymore. He wasn't thinking about being homesick. He was thinking about learning a new way to do a lunar,
Mm-hmm. And like Liberty said, and Shreve, it's this idea of when you're helping someone else, right? Anxiously engaged in a good cause. And it really helps, and this is something that you can apply in your own life. It always helps when you're feeling down, when you're feeling discouraged, when you're feeling like there's no hope. Realizing the bigger picture, realizing kind of God's perspective up there, looking and seeing how things really stand. And that's always an encouragement. And one of the very best ways to do that is by serving others. Because when you serve others, you realize, a couple things. You realize, one, that others have often greater trials and are going through harder difficulties than you are, and two, it also gives you the happiness that God feels, because God is the happiest person, so doing what he does will give you that happiness and that peace. As a side note, has anyone read, let's see, I think, Kaz, I think your mic is on. If you wouldn't mind muting that.
Sorry.
No problem. No worries. No worries. Just as a side note, if anyone's interested, there's a very good talk. It's by President Packer or President Benson, and it's called Do Not Despair. And he goes through 12 points, 12 ways to banish depression, discouragement, any kind of those sad feelings. 12 points. It's a really good talk. So okay, so she was just wondering, Shri, I will find the talk and I'll just post it through the chat. But while I'm doing that, how did Charlie help Nat? So Nat helps Charlie, right? He helps him, and we kind of already answered this, but it's a two-way going here. Nat's helping Charlie and Charlie's helping Nat. And
not only was Nat not lying when he said that it would help him remember, I think he might have been feeling homesick too, and I suppose the biggest thing is I think Nat enjoys teaching.
mm-hmm.
I think it would lift his spirits because Charlie got it so quickly that it kind of made him feel like, oh, maybe I've become an even better teacher and I'm able to portray what I'm meaning easier.
Yeah, very good, very good. And like someone else mentioned in the comments, that Nat probably, when he saw Charlie, it probably reminded him of himself, because it was similar situation, similar background, and Charlie was thirsting for the knowledge, and here Nat is, he has it, and being able to share that. Let's see, Connor, the link I chatted is just a link to a conference talk called Do Not Despair. So that is just for some that were wondering. That's the conference talk I referenced. Really encourage reading it after or whenever you get the time. Okay, let's see. What I'm going to do is we're going to jump ahead. I did have another reading activity, but I'm going to do that after 3 so that those who need to go can go. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump ahead and we're going to discuss some last literary conflicts and where we see that in Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. So those who stay after about 3:05 or whatever, we'll do another reading activity for those who are able to stay. So one of the literary terms we've already talked a lot about is climax and conflict. Does anyone want to sum up really quick for me what climax is, just as a recap?
Isn't climax like where they conflict something, like something happens to the characters or creates a problem in the story or something like that?
Good. So you're exactly right. So
Conflict.
Yeah, that's the con. Yes, very good, Justin. So the conflict is that friction that exists between the main character and it's either nature, society, another person, and at times even himself, and we'll talk about that. And then the climax is really the tip of that iceberg. So throughout the story, it kind of looks like a wave. There's good times, bad times, trouble, success. It goes up and down, but then as you move into the middle to end of the book, it really skyrockets to a big climax, the most exciting part, right? Like Olson said. You see this in movies where you'll be having struggles and triumphs and different elements in different scenes during most of the movie, but towards the middle to the end, that's the big climax. That's when it's the most exciting. And that's where it really determines, is this going to end successful or is this going to end unsuccessful? So let's just review a couple of the literary terms that we've talked about. So man versus society. What is man versus society? That's good.
It's where
Yeah, go ahead.
the character has conflict with the rest of the world or the people that he's around.
Good. So the culture, the kind of society, where do we see that in Carry On, Mr. Bowditch?
Whenever Nat is an indentured servant.
Good. Good, Olson. Very good. Any other instances anyone wants to throw out, maybe where they see that?
I think another example is when he's writing his book about navigation. Lots of people, they don't trust navigating by books.
Mm-hmm. Right, so it's this conflict of this tradition where, and I think it's interesting that in the book he really helps to show that the mathematics can help come up with exact calculations, and that's something that also goes against the tradition where they felt like it was very unsure, uncertain. They didn't realize that they could use the mathematics to really come up with a pure calculation that, as it mentioned several times, saves lives. How about man versus self? What is man versus self?
Very dangerous. It's someone going through a guilt cycle to the point that they blame themselves, then get mad. It's essentially two sides of someone attacking each other.
Mm-hmm. Good. A conflict, an internal conflict. Is man versus self bad or good or something or both or neither?
I would say man versus self in quantities is good, but if it keeps going, it's really bad.
I'd say the same thing. It's good when used right.
Good. I like what Jacob said about how it's good when it's used for the right purpose, right? Because where do we see man versus self in the scriptures?
Nephi.
Good, Nathan. Where do we see? Where does Nephi exemplify man versus self?
Well, a lot in the scriptures, his family is not losing faith, but quarreling against the Lord and being mad at him, and at one point he was the only one that did not lose faith, and he had to fight, should I be with my family, or is this the right thing? And he ended up helping his family out.
Great example, Nathan. So you can think of that as a very good example of man versus man, specifically, because it's the main character, right? And he's coming into a conflict with other individuals, other men in the story or in the circumstance, and they're coming into a conflict there. So that's a good example. And so it can be, like Shri said, it can be a hero versus villain. Sometimes there's conflict between even those that maybe are not necessarily the villains, are maybe on your side, like the example Nathan used, where obviously, throughout the early part of the Book of Mormon, there is a lot of conflict between Nephi and Laman and Lemuel, versus, as in the specific example Nathan mentioned, which was very good, you had Nephi, and it is at odds with some of the people that were and still were his friends, just coming into some conflict. So that's a very good example of man versus man. Man versus self, more specifically, is man at odds with themselves. So an example of this would be, I'm going to use an example from the scriptures. How many have memorized or in seminary or were in seminary during Book of Mormon and memorized Mosiah 3:19? Or knows what that scripture is? Anyone have it memorized that would like to show off their stuff and say it for us?
It says, "Wherefore the natural man is an enemy to God, and has been since the fall of Adam, and will be forever and ever, unless he yields to the temptation of the evil spirit and puts off the Holy Spirit and puts off the natural man, and becomes as a little child, meek, humble, submissive, willing to submit to all things, as the Lord, whatsoever the Lord seeth fit to inflict upon him, as the child does submit to his father."
Very good, Nathan. Very, very good. So this scripture, Mosiah 3:19, it's a powerful teaching. It's one of the most powerful teachings of the scriptures. Really, all of the gospel goes back to it. In us, we have the natural man, and then we have that part of us that wants to be like God. And the natural man is whatever part of us, to whatever degree, and it's different per person, that part of us that doesn't want to choose the right, that part of us that doesn't want to get up early in the morning, maybe when their parents leave and say, okay, I need you to do this, they're like, I don't really want to do that. It's the part of us that doesn't maybe want to eat the right kinds of food, maybe wants to go be more lazy, right? It's any part of us that is appealed to, attracted to, or leans toward doing the wrong thing. And so all throughout the scriptures, it's all about, the entire scriptures, it's very simple. Salvation is all about bringing that natural man under control, completely driving it from us, having it burned out by the Holy Ghost, and being changed, completely changed, literally changed. Our thoughts, our personality, everything changed to become like God. So in Man versus Self, that's the literary term for seeing this conflict. So you see this a lot of times. They'll use this in movies or stories. You can see it in history where you have an individual and they're conflicted. They know what they should do, or maybe know what they want to do, and that conflicts with what they should do, or perhaps what someone is asking them to do, or what they planned on doing. There's this conflict. And so what's the solution to man versus self? That's what I'm going to ask the question. We have all this conflict here, man versus society, man versus nature, man versus self. What's the solution for that? Is there a solution? And if there is, what is it?
I think it can be just accepting that there are differences in people. Society today is kind of making it so that you feel like you can't have an opposite opinion, but that's something that we all have. We all have an opinion, and we can decide, okay, so I am arguing with this person, we have conflict, and then you decide that it's not worth fighting over anymore, so you just agree to disagree.
Thanks, Haley. Let's see, I think, was it Shri or, yes, Shri mentioned praying, fasting. At the end of the day, the solution to all of these ills is turning back to the law of God, turning back to God's way of thinking, God's way of acting, God's way of caring for the people around us, God's way of making decisions, God's way of choosing in every area of our life. Sometimes it's not easy to put God into a box and say, this is what God tells me about. This is what God is influenced in. This is what this is the jurisdiction of my life God is over. And then I have these other parts. What I wear, what I eat, what I watch. Those are maybe what I read. Those are things that are outside and don't really have to do with God. And that conflict will never be resolved until we turn it over and we start studying God's law and living God's law. And that is why in the Old Testament, it talks about how in the last days, there's a lot of conflict, right? That's the message, right, of the last days. There's a lot of conflict. There's all of these conflicts we're talking about and many, many more. And it says the solution is God in the end is going to heal our land, heal us, heal our families by bringing judgment. And judgment in the scriptures is the law of God. And sometimes we can look at the law of God as a negative thing, but really when you look at the scriptures, right, the law of God is what purges out that natural man. It's what teaches us how to find happiness. It's what teaches us how to heal our families. And I'm going to read this quote from Joseph Smith, and then I want to get 2 or 3 comments about where you see this attitude in Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. So Joseph Smith said, I am like a huge rough stone rolling from a high mountain. Now what he's referring to, he's drawing allusions to the vision that Daniel interpreted for King Nebuchadnezzar, where King Nebuchadnezzar saw the stone cut without hands and that goes and expands the gospel across the whole world and eventually breaks down all of the corrupt kingdoms of the world. So Joseph Smith says, the only polishing I get is when some corner gets rubbed off by coming in contact with something else. Sounds like he's describing conflict, right? That we've been talking about. He says that's when he gets polished. He says when it strikes with accelerated force against religious bigotry, priestcraft, lawyercraft, doctorcraft, lying editors, suburban judges and jurors, and the authority of perjured executives backed by mobs, blasphemers, and sorry, I realize that the quote's not on the screen, so what I'm cutting out you can't see it. So it should be on the screen now, so you can catch. It was about halfway through. He says backed by, let's see, if you're getting the, let's see here. Let me try putting pause here. Are you still getting the robot voice now?
No.
Okay. Hopefully that will be better. Okay. Closer here. Okay, so just to recap, since we had the voice checkout thing, so Joseph Smith makes this comment, and you can read on the screen. I won't read the whole thing, but he says that his polishing happens when he comes in conflict or contact with something else. And he comes in and he lists some of those things. He comes into conflict in the political arena, in religious matters, in cultural matters, in really any kind of area. Joseph Smith would come into contact and he would have the truth, and he would and it would polish him more. That conflict would polish his own character. He says, all hell knocking off a corner here and a corner there, and thus I will become a smooth and polished shaft in the quiver of the Almighty. So Joseph Smith is teaching here, showing that it's conflict that makes us better. It's when we embrace the fight in this life, when we go out there and we are not afraid of evil, we're not afraid of temptation, we're not afraid of the trials that will come, but we go out and we embrace them and we say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can't do this on my own. I'm not enough, but I can do this through Christ. And when we go out and embrace the fight, that's what makes us, purifies us. That's what polishes us. That's what makes us a smooth and polished shaft in the quiver of the Almighty. Because I get 2 examples of where you see this in Carry On, Mr. Bowditch. a similar principle, this idea of conflict creating polishing. Do we see that with Nat Bowditch? Okay, thank you, Chaz. We'll see you later next week.
Okay, bye.
Where do we see this in Carry On, Mr. Bowditch? And then we can, then we'll have a closing prayer. Where do we see conflict making the main character better? Where do we see conflict and coming into contact with versus society, versus himself, versus other people, versus nature, all this different conflict? Where do we see that building him into a hero rather than just an ordinary person?
He has the conflict with nature when he couldn't get a lunar to find out where he was, and so because of that, he found a new way to make a lunar to solve his problem. Kind of a man versus nature situation.
Good, good, very, very good. Like Caleb said, everyone dying, it really taught him how to become a master of himself and to be able to move on through trials and be able to not collapse in emotional heartache, even in the midst of emotional heartache. Can I get one more example before we have a closing prayer?
When you have conflict, like let's take an example from monolopic conflict or business conflict, or yeah. When two stores are competing in the same neighborhood, two, say, clothing stores or grocery stores, the idea is to be better than the other. And so to make what you have more appealing and better priced and everything. So when you have conflict between two things, two ideas, two people, the idea is to try and make them both perfect, or as close to perfect as you can, and then choose the best.